Hi, I'm Dave Gibbons, the Director of Archaeology here at the Jamestown Rediscovery Program. And today I'm going to talk about a geophysical survey we've conducted as part of a preservation effort of our Jamestown seawall, a concrete revetment that was constructed at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. So we've got several papers in our session today that are fantastic. Senior Staff Archaeologist Mariana Hartley will be talking about excavations inside the Memorial Church, which covers the 1617 church and multiple iterations of churches thereafter. Anna Shackelford will be talking about the excavations on the outside. She's our site supervisor. Mike Lavin, Director of Collections, will be talking about the collections in the state and reorienting our collection. Sean Romo will be giving an update of the Angela site excavation site of First Africans, and Peter Leach will be talking about doing geophysical work on an individual grave inside the Memorial Church. So fantastic set of papers, and I think it will show you guys some of the technological work we're doing to both assess and preserve our property. Now, if you're not familiar with Jamestown, we are located 30 some miles inland on the north side of the James River. It's a 1,500 acre, we co-manage with the National Park Service, Colonial National Historic Park, and Preservation Virginia, formerly known as the Association for Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, or the APVA. Our site is located on the western end and is exposed to the westerly winds, which over time has caused erosion. Now, our story begins as an organization, APVA, or Preservation Virginia, when this is a Civil War sketch. Just after the Civil War, townsfolk, Williamsburg folks came out and were complaining that human remains were eroding out of the then Confederate Fort Pocahontas into the James River. And so a group, Preservation Virginia, or APVA, came out, acquired 22.5 acres of the property, and we now know that interestingly, that cemetery was the group of 1607 settlers that were buried there, most in the fall and winter of 1607 and 8. That site, 10 of those individuals have been excavated, and it is currently a NSF grant research by Dr. Raquel Flesks, which is just underway to look at relatedness within the early population. Now, in 1893, the PV, like I said, acquired the 22.5 acres, and this is a picture of our iconic tower embedded in amongst the trees, here. But excavations quickly started an interest in both preserving the property, keeping people from stealing relics, but also excavations to find the first representative governmental body in English North America, the House of Burgesses that met on this site in 1617. They were successful to that end and were led by the United States' first woman historical archaeologist, Mary Jeffrey Galt, who was directing the archaeology there. And those excavations took place from 1897 to 1906. But in the beginning, the erosion on the property on the western end, which is caused by the long fetch, the 7 to 10 miles of wind buildup on the river from the west. The prevailing winds blow out of the west 99% of the time. That became an issue that they wanted to address. And so they enlisted congressional support and began to look at the creating something. And this is the first iteration, concrete blocks just laid up against the shoreline, which as you can see, clearly didn't work. Interestingly, the yellow arrow is the burial ground as it was eroding out, we now know. So they, as time went on, by 1901, they enlisted Corps of Engineers Samuel Young to both engineer a seawall, and Samuel had applied his trade or plied his trade out on the Mississippi River, which is pretty interesting. But by 1904, he'd completed the preservation of the western side of PV's property, and the western side of the island. And what he constructed was a series of concrete blocks that were 2 foot by 4 foot, put together, fastened at the bottom by wooden posts, and had blocks at the top fastened together by brass or copper and lead anchored steeples, with a ditch on the landward side to drain water to the southeast. So rather unique for our area. And the seawall has served us well over time through many, during my career at Jamestown, many hurricanes and nor'easters, as you can see here, where it's quite floods the area. But it has had damage, and that principally has been from the backside, where water gets behind and then erodes out. And that's something I'm going to talk about at the end of the talk, and what we saw with the geophysical survey. But this erosion starts with voids that form underneath, and that's principally what we wanted to look at. Now, the implementation of our process and our study would involve geophysical work. And over the years, we've gotten quite handy with geophysics, and we use GSSI, Geophysical Survey Systems Incorporated equipment out of Nashua, New Hampshire. And we'd gotten quite good at, as you can see here, this is the west wall of the 1617 church in the midst of our tower. But the engineering firm who recommended a geophysical survey of the wall wanted $5,000 essentially per day for a couple linear, 100 linear feet, 200 linear feet, something like that. And there's 1,500 linear feet. So it just made sense for us to purchase the equipment and work with it. And so I called Peter Leach here, who's geophysical specialist there, an archaeologist, and spoke to him about it. And we decided that we would go ahead and purchase a pro version with a SUR 4000 with a 350 megahertz antenna to evaluate the wall. And he called me up in the fall and said, hey, I'm going to Mexico to use that piece of equipment at Chichen to work with the INAH down there on a plaza and evaluate, looking for voids and other things, and you could get some good experience, and who could resist that? So I joined him, and one of the studies that we did was to cut a path here, as you can see, through what's a feature called a rejollada, which was presumed to be a subsidence in which the Maya were farming in, and we wanted to look to see if there were voids underneath, or caves or quavos. And we, to that end, we were successful not in the rejollada, but around the landscape. And it became clear to me that that was the piece of equipment we needed. And so, not very unlike our constructed seawall, we would be looking for voids underneath. So we purchased that piece of equipment with the 350 antenna, 350 megahertz, and began a methodological survey that involved 2 foot intervals, using the lines of the blocks to then interpolate the data. Worked perfectly in terms that we could see voids. On the landward side at the top, we were seeing extensive voiding, and then nominal voiding on the riverside, which was quite shocking. As it turned out, the voids at the top were from aggregate that was placed underneath the blocks, and it had silt in it that had simply subsided or washed down. And subsequent inspection of all these areas revealed the damage to be really nominal. On the lower side, though, however, in a few places, it was pretty significant. Now, to get all this data together, we enlisted the help of Stefan Clausen at Nearview. He's the owner of a UAV company who does multispectral imagery. And on top of his data, we then skinned this project and subsequent ones since. So as you can imagine, it gave us a micro DEM of our entire property, essentially like LiDAR. But in this case, there are 2 areas of concern. Principally on the far eastern end down near the church, we saw significant voiding here with the yellow arrows, and that was from, we believe, from water sheeting down off the hill that's funneled into that area and has gotten behind. Additionally, on the western side of the property, where there's a freshwater swamp that's been growing and encroaching, we saw significant voiding, which are the blue circles here, and yellow arrows. So significant voiding, and that was, as we began to understand it, that was from the freshwater swamp that's back there, pushing against the backside of the seawall and creating those voids. Now, that swamp is the pitch and tar swamp that was mentioned by the colonists from the get-go. Early on, they trenched out the area, dried it out, but that now is increasing with sea level rise, water level rise from the ground, and also meteoric water, rainwater. So it bifurcates and drains our property and heads eastward onto Park Service property. But the green arrow is the location of interest, and the yellow arrow was once dry, and the Park Service conducted excavations here in the 1950s. So pretty alarming to find that out. Now, on the seawall, this pushing from behind has caused subsidence, as the lower aggregate is literally washed away, along with the long fetch there that it was scouring the front. And so we've seen a couple locations where it's visible on the surface. And so the proposed seawall improvements with our engineers involve simply putting a heavy riprap down at the base to secure the base and protect the lower end of the seawall. So nominal changes, and very exciting to hear that it'll have low impact. And in fact, the areas where it's subsided, they're just talking about filling in from the front, all of which can be removed. Now, interestingly, I will say that GSSI's equipment's phenomenal. We were able to see 6 to 8 feet down in there, and I noticed some geometric structure, and I called up Peter because I couldn't really figure out what would have been down there. And he said, was there a seawall before the seawall? And I said, oh my gosh, yes, there was. It was that first layer of concrete, which actually has some voids in it, giving us that geometric structure way down in there. So pretty interesting application there. Now, in the interim of essentially stopping excavations and working on this project, we noted throughout the summer of this past year and last year that during the project we've been seeing 4 to 8 inches of rain that has filled up the property, and this rain, the property was never meant to drain that much water. And so we had thought that it was just tidal, perhaps, but then began to realize that this meteoric water, this rainwater, combined with the rising water table, is really what's causing the damage. Now, our collections and curatorial team conducted salinity testing on that water, and it has less salt than our drinking water. And so it absolutely is. Now, I'm not saying that we don't get, tidal events, storms, because we do, and we have recently nor'easters this fall, but it now has become very clear that our future damage, and we're shifting to understanding the hydrology of the property, or our property and our partner's property, and how that will affect the site. In the future, we are hoping to come up with a solution to protect the backside of the seawall. Obviously, it needs that. Then hopefully drain the front side and the landward side, excuse me, and then excavate over time. And that will undoubtedly take a number of years. The engineers, it's about 7 acres, so we'll likely have at least 5 years of excavations. And as you can see here from this graphic, I forgot to mention, it's about almost 70 acres drained into that area and are now accumulating to the west, which is unusual because the property slopes to the east. So as we go forward, one will be to stop the inundation and come up with a better drain system, and then mitigate that. And that will take quite a bit of effort. So thank you all for listening to the talk today. The subsequent talks will cover what we've been up to essentially through COVID, in which I think this project you've seen today and several of the others are essentially making lemonade out of lemons, in which we could take the time to do some projects that normally we would not have. So enjoy the talks today, guys, and thanks for listening.